Welcome back to another Explainer. Today, we're grabbing our detective hats and stepping straight into the totally fascinating world of experimental design. You know, if you've ever looked at a research study and thought, wait, how can they be so absolutely sure that this specific intervention actually caused those results? Well, you are in the exact right place. We're going to unpack the ultimate toolkit that researchers use to separate the hard facts from, well, just mere coincidences.
So it all starts with this one fundamental mystery. How do you prove that one thing actually causes another? Think about it. As a researcher, your main goal is to prove, literally without a shadow of a doubt, that your specific intervention caused a specific outcome. You really don't want to get fooled by random chance or outside events or some pre-existing differences between your subjects. You need to build a case so unbelievably tight that any alternative explanations are just completely locked out.
Okay, let's dive into this, because the answer to that mystery goes all the way back to the early 20th century. This core idea here really captures the logic formalized by statistician Ronald Fisher during his early agricultural field trials. He realized something pretty incredible. Basically, if two groups start out equivalent in every single way except for the one treatment they receive, then any later difference between them can be confidently attributed to that treatment. It's a beautifully simple idea, but it's still the absolute gold standard for discovering the truth in quantitative research today. But how do we actually guarantee that two groups are perfectly equivalent?
Part 1. The Researcher's Toolkit.
All right, let's open up that toolkit and look at the 3 critical tools you need to build an airtight case. First up is the treatment. Think of this as our primary suspect, right? It's the thing we're actively manipulating to see if it makes a real impact. In fields like applied linguistics or education, this is usually the intervention you give to the experimental group, like a brand new teaching method or a specific type of grammar instruction. As the researcher, you deliberately control who gets this treatment and who doesn't.
Next up, our second tool is the control group. So if the treatment is our primary suspect, the control group is our ultimate alibi. This is a comparison group that does not receive that experimental treatment. Instead, they might just get the standard instruction or maybe an alternative treatment. But they provide this absolutely crucial baseline against which we can judge the treatment group's outcome. Without a control group, we've honestly got nothing to compare our results to.
And our third tool, random assignment. Honestly, this is the practical tool that makes the real magic happen. By assigning your participants to the treatment or control groups purely by chance, you ensure that the groups are equivalent, on average, before the experiment even begins. And this is huge because it accounts for both measured traits, like prior test scores, and completely unmeasured characteristics, like hidden motivation levels. Literally, no amount of careful hand matching by a researcher can fully guarantee that level of equivalence. Random assignment is the secret sauce of a true experiment.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how researchers map out their investigations. They use this sort of secret code to see a study at a glance. It's a simple shorthand. R stands for random assignment. O stands for an observation, so usually a pre-test or a post-test measurement. And X stands for the treatment itself. Once you start stringing these letters together, you can instantly see the architecture of literally any study and know exactly how strong its causal claims really are.
Let's put those codebreaker skills to the test here. Look at the weak pre-experimental designs, like the XO one-shot case study. In that one, you just apply a treatment and observe. Or the OXO design, where you pre-test, treat, and post-test one single group. These are considered weak because they leave way too many variables uncontrolled. But contrast that with the strong, true experimental design, ROXO over ROO. Here, we randomly assign participants, pre-test both groups, give one the treatment and the other the control, and then post-test both. That exact, specific structure is what locks down causality for sure.
Moving on to Part 2, Threats to your experiment.
So why exactly do we need such tight security in our experimental designs? Well, it's because of this rogues gallery of villains that constantly threaten what researchers call our internal validity, basically our confidence that the treatment, and absolutely nothing else, caused the effect. Let's run through these usual suspects. First, history. That's when an outside event happens during the study and alters the outcomes. Or maturation, participants naturally developing or just getting smarter over time anyway. Then there's testing, where simply taking a pre-test makes someone better at the post-test. We also have to watch out for instrumentation, like if the scorer or the test itself changes mid-study. And selection, meaning your groups were just fundamentally different right from the start. Oh, and we definitely can't forget mortality or attrition, when participants drop out unevenly, leaving biased groups. Finally, regression to the mean, where extreme scores naturally drift back toward the average on a second test. Without a control group and random assignment, literally any one of these villains could be the real cause of the changes in your data.
So the crucial point here is how elegantly a strong design fights back against all of that. A control group actually neutralizes these threats. If you have a control group running simultaneously, both groups experience the same history and the same natural maturation over time, right? So if a gap opens up between the treatment and control group at the post-test, it cannot be maturation or history because both groups experience those things equally. By process of elimination, the difference must be the treatment.
But, internal validity isn't our only concern here. We also have to worry about external validity, which is how well our results generalize out into the real world. And real-world settings, like language classrooms, introduce these super unique human behavior psychological traps. For example, the Hawthorne effect happens when participants change their behavior simply because they know they're being studied. Then there's the novelty effect, which gives a temporary performance boost just because a method is new. But that might quickly fade over time. And my personal favorite, the John Henry effect. This happens when a control group realizes they are the baseline and decides to work unusually hard just to compete. That can actually mask a totally real treatment effect. Human behavior is wild, right?
Part 3. Real-world classroom chaos.
Those psychological traps actually lead us perfectly into our next big challenge. What happens when we take our pristine, lab-like experimental designs and try to apply them in the messy, chaotic reality of actual schools? In a perfect world, sure, we'd randomly assign every individual student. But here is the reality check. What happens when you absolutely cannot randomly assign your participants because they are already locked into intact classroom schedules? You can't exactly just reshuffle an entire high school for the sake of an applied linguistics experiment, right?
So when random assignment is officially off the table, researchers turn to the quasi-experimental design. This approach is great because it retains the manipulation of the independent variable, meaning you still have a treatment and a control, but it just lacks that full random assignment piece. Instead, you might assign an intact class A to the treatment and an intact class B to the control. It's highly feasible for real educational settings, but researchers have to be extra cautious. Because they can't fully rule out that selection threat we talked about earlier, they often have to use statistical controls to account for known confounds, like the students' prior proficiency levels, just to make those groups as comparable as possible.
And there's another very real practical hurdle here. If a new teaching method is genuinely working, is it really fair to just withhold it from the control group entirely? To solve this ethical dilemma, researchers often use a waitlist design, where the control group gets the beneficial treatment immediately after the study concludes. Or, instead of comparing a treatment to absolutely nothing, researchers might simply compare two plausible alternative treatments to see which one works better. This ensures that both groups are fully supported during the entire study. Okay, before we solve our final case, I need to warn you about a trap that catches even seasoned researchers. This is definitely something you should always look for when reading a study: the sample size trap. Look, a brilliant experimental design is completely useless if you lack statistical power. You absolutely need enough participants to reliably detect a real effect. A super common mistake in classroom research is running a study with only 15 to 20 participants per group. That is often way too small to detect anything but massive, glaringly obvious changes. And when researchers do this and find nothing, they might falsely conclude that no effect exists, which is a type 2 error, when in reality, they simply lack the statistical power to see the genuine effect that was sitting right in front of them.
Let's move to part 4 and see how this builds: solving a real case.
All right, it's time to bring all of our tools, symbols, and safeguards together to solve a real-world case file. Here is our setup. We're testing task-based versus traditional grammar instruction. Step 1, we formulate a clear hypothesis. Task-based instruction causes greater accuracy gains. Step 2, random assignment. We split 60 learners into our true experimental design, ROX10 for the task group and ROX20 for the traditional group. Step 3, we standardize the conditions fiercely. Both groups get identical instructional time, the exact same tests to avoid any instrumentation threats, and we even rotate the teacher across sections to avoid a teacher confound. Finally, step 4, we analyze the data by running an independent samples t-test on the gain scores between the pre-test and post-test.
And this brilliantly illustrates why true experimental design is considered the gold standard. Case closed. The random assignment successfully addressed the selection threat. Running both groups on identical calendars totally defeated the history threat. And rotating the teacher removed a massive real-world confound. Because this specific setup intentionally locks out those extraneous variables, if our t-test shows a significant result, say a p-value of less than 0.05, we can truly trust our causal claim.
we can confidently say that the instructional approach actually caused the difference.
But, as any good detective knows, answering one question almost always leads to another. Think about it. If this carefully controlled experiment worked perfectly for university students, can we guarantee it will work exactly the same way for younger learners in a totally different, messy school setting? That right there is the eternal trade-off between internal validity and external generalizability. It's a great reminder to always look critically at the specific context of any study, double-check their toolkit, and never, ever stop questioning the data you see out in the real world. Thanks for hanging out and learning with me today, and I'll see you in the next explainer.